Hello, everybody who's already signed in to this Transparency International Canada webinar. And it is 1 o'clock. We'll be starting in just 1 second. I currently can't see all participants, but I assume most people are signing in now. Can my fellow panelists see the list of participants? Are names starting to come in? Okay, great. Well, we'll get things underway for everybody that is coming in, and we'll give the introductions. So welcome everybody from across Canada. We have registrants, so good afternoon, good morning, and even good evening for anybody who's joining us from overseas. My name is James Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of Transparency International Canada. Thank you for joining us for this second webinar we are hosting. We hope everyone is staying healthy and safe during these times. For those of you who are new to Transparency International Canada, a quick introduction. We are the Canadian chapter of the world's leading anti-corruption movement with over 100 country chapters around the world and the Secretariat in Berlin. Transparency International was founded in 1996 and Transparency International Canada was founded in 1998. We have a head office in Toronto, but we have volunteers and board members all across the country. You can find out more about our mandate and the work that we do on our website, which includes research on various topics, including beneficial ownership, compliance measures, transparency in the extractive sector, as well as education, of which this webinar is part of that mandate, and issues that we're advocating for change. That's all on our website at www.transparencycanada.ca. On today's webinar, we are talking about anti-corruption education. What are we teaching future leaders? We have an excellent panel, each of whom I've gotten to know over the last few years in this role. But before we get started, TI Canada's work could not be possible without a number of supporters, which includes our individual members. A number of you are signed up today, donors, and of course, our organizational supporters. At our platinum supporter level, we have Export Development Canada. At our gold supporter level, we are proud to have Banque Nationale, Blake's LLP, BLG LLP, Deloitte Canada, Dentons Canada LLP, Siemens Canada, Sky Power Global, and TD. And at our silver supporters level, we're proud to have ACFO, Alicia Csr, Kinross Gold, KPMG Canada, Mintz Group, Thales, and Vidoc Group. Thank you very much to our supporters. If you're interested in becoming a supporter for TI Canada, you can go to our website and you'll see, does my cursor come up? Yes, it does. You can go to the Get Involved and you'll see how to become an organizational supporter. You will also see how to become a member, or if you just want to have a make a donation to TI Canada and get your tax receipt for next year right away, you can click on that donate button and make a donation to TI Canada. I'll be providing hyperlinks in the chat box. So, with all of that preamble, I'm excited to introduce our panel who has joined us today. I have it in a bit of a different order, but I'll go from who I see below me, which goes in alphabetical order. Joining us all the way from University of Victoria, we have Dr. Jerry Ferguson. TI Canada has known Dr. Jerry Ferguson for quite some time as a professor at the School of Law at University of Victoria. We host Jerry's textbook on anti-corruption law on the TI Canada website, which is also linked to the iClear website. We've been happy to host that for a number of years, and Jerry will be talking about his further backgrounds with us in a bit. Next, we have Dr. David Dick from the University of Calgary at the philosophy department, teaching philosophy there. We've had the pleasure, TI Canada has had the pleasure of knowing Dr. David Dick for quite some time as he hosts the Integrity Network in Calgary, which works with a number of business leaders and compliance officers there. And TI Canada has had the pleasure of partnering with David on hosting a number of presentations with our volunteer board members out there. Next on my list, I see Dr. Carol Lau. We've had the pleasure of getting to know Carol very recently, as she is the professor of law at UBC Allard Law School and also at the Sauder School of Business, where she teaches. She can explain this much better than I can. I don't have my notes in front of me while I'm also sharing the screen. But UBC has been involved with TI Canada quite extensively in Vancouver in our collective known as the Anti-Corruption Law Program, which also involves the International Center for Criminal Law and Justice Reform out there. We've had a very active membership out in Vancouver. You can contact us to know more about that. And next on our list, we have Dr. Chris Mcdonald at Ryerson University. We've had the pleasure of having Chris speak at a number of our presentations at our Toronto Day of Dialogue over the years. Those of you who know our Toronto Day of Dialogue may have noticed we haven't had it in May because of COVID-19. We've had to postpone it potentially to October. We'll see what the future holds for us and how we'll hold it in the future. But TI Canada has had an excellent relationship with academia over the years. These aren't the only schools we've had relationships with. We were, of course, founded at York University, for those who know us for quite some time. Great relationship with partners up at University of Ottawa as well, and other schools. We're always looking to reach out and make more partnerships with more institutions. It's a natural fit for TI Canada. But what we're talking about today isn't so much on just research or partnerships with academia. It's on the issue of anti-corruption education. And I've pointed out in pre-calls with our panel about this, that this idea first came from Dr. Mcdonald in a presentation he gave at a TI Canada Day of Dialogue about 2 years ago. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Chris. It was on a paper he presented that gave a survey of recent graduates who were working on the front line of financial institutions who had received some anti-corruption education, and was looking back on, well, what are their thoughts on pressure they come under or the ethics and compliance programs that they see. And oftentimes there are a number of programs that are directed at mid-career individuals, which are fantastic. And that we definitely need. And we definitely see research done on compliance officers and what they learn. But within this panel, we want to look at what are current students learning on anti-corruption? What education, both technical and at a philosophical and ethics level, are they receiving to prepare them to go into the workforce? For a number of years, we've all seen headlines that say, millennials. I am a millennial, despite some of the gray. Most people don't realize that millennials are into their late 30s now. I'm the first year of them. But millennials, and I suppose the new generation, we're calling them Generation Z or I generation, want to see values and ethics with their employer. They want to see their jobs have purpose on top of having good paychecks. And so we want to see what does the education field prep them for with those values. And on top of that, there's been a lot of chatter, especially in the past few months, of this move from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy. A number of us think back to the letter released by BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, putting out that position. We've seen the ESG indicators, environment, society, and governance for investors. So there's a lot being pushed on social values into corporations. And COVID-19 has especially amplified this call for better business conduct and ethics. And anti-corruption definitely underpins that. But are students ready, starting in the front lines of their jobs and eventually moving on to transform their workplaces and engage with their workplaces with anti-corruption education? And that's what we want to talk about today. We'll be going through a first round of questions with each of our panelists, talking about what they're working on in their education fields, what their schools provide in these fields. And then we'll take questions from the audience during this time. Please ask questions into either the chat panel or into the question box. Most of you have seen, it's been about almost 3 months of lockdown. I'm sure a number of you have engaged on Zoom webinars by this point. We'll be going through a second round of questions after the initial Q&A, talking about where our panelists think anti-corruption education should be going, or what challenges they've seen that they want corrected in anti-corruption education. So I've talked quite a bit at this point. I'll start sharing my screen, and we'll move on to our first panelist. I'm happy to have Jerry Ferguson speak to us from Victoria. Jerry, take it away. You're still on mute. That'll be the great line of 2020. Oh, you're still on mute, Jerry. There we go.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, good afternoon. I am not, as you can see from your camera, I am not a millennium. Perhaps I'm a millennium squared. I don't know what that means, but that's quite larger. And I thought I would start with a few background observations to sort of set the stage for the teaching of corruption. And I have to restrict myself largely to law schools, which I teach in, as opposed to business schools, public schools of public governance, et cetera. But in general, right across the university structure, I think it's fair to say that the teaching of global corruption in any discipline is a relatively new phenomena. In law schools, especially, the impetus for its growth really came from the widespread adoption of two conventions, one which many of you are aware of, the OECD Convention Against Bribery, and that was 1999, and then in 2005, the adoption of the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is pretty much adopted worldwide. So all of a sudden, post-2005, we have a lot of individual nations who have signed on to the convention who now have to enact domestic laws in their own country to implement their agreement with the standards under the convention. So all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of new law, which, you know, the challenge is, so how are we going to teach it? When are we going to teach it, et cetera? The UNCAC, excuse me, is administered by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, the ODC, the UN ODC. And so their responsibility is to make sure the world adopts it, encourages them, supports them, et cetera. The OECD decided that education was an important aspect of preventing corruption. And in 2011, they decided to strike a committee of academics from around the world in order to encourage and promote the teaching of corruption, particularly in business law, public governance, but right across the whole structure, philosophy, sociology, criminology, et cetera. And I was invited to join that particular group. So my interest was certainly brought to the fore as a result of joining that committee. The committee has a project which is referred to as ACAD, ACAD. That means Anti-Corruption Academic Initiatives. And if you simply Google ACAD initiatives, that will take you immediately to the UNODC website. And I want those of you who are interested in more information about how to go about teaching courses, sample courses, et cetera. It's a wonderful website for you to visit if you're looking for materials. I want to just point to three of those quickly. The first is there's a whole model course on how would you teach about the UN Convention Against Corruption if that was your focus. A whole course, materials, written, video, et cetera, assignments, objectives, et cetera. There's a second course written from an Access to Justice program, which again has about 10 or 12 course modules, materials, videos, etc. And then thirdly, ACAD and the UNODC in general have a very extensive library on all the laws of corruption around the world. And you find that in something called TRAC, track. So I'll stop there, but you could spend hours and days roaming through the ACAD initiative's website if you're interested in more material. Very briefly, I said I became a member of ACAD in 2011. We met several times around the world. Basically, we talked about how do you promote what happens in universities in terms of corruption, and how do you promote more education in corruption. And so these projects I've mentioned, really it's getting materials out to people who are interested. It's a big job to start a new course or a new module if you don't yourself know much about the area. And that's how most of us started out in this, not knowing much about corruption. So I decided with consultation from others that what could I do in the Canadian context where there was no global corruption courses in the law faculties. And what could I do to encourage that? I decided I could encourage that by creating materials for such a course. And so James has already mentioned I produced a course book, which is free online through various websites, including TR. It's got 13 chapters on 13 different topics relevant to a law course. And that is where I've started, and I've been using that set of materials. They've been updated a couple of times now since 2015. And when I said relatively recent, I want you to understand that in 2015, when UVic offered this particular course, that was the first course in Canada, Canadian law school, I should say, or at least English speaking, but I'm pretty sure it was first in French speaking as well, a first course on global corruption. So in the law faculties, at least, it's a pretty recent phenomenon. So I think that's probably my 5 minutes, and I think I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much, Jerry. That was a great introduction on the history of where we've come to and how we've gotten into anti-corruption law. And it's always just a reminder of basically how new anti-corruption is as a global movement and as a global campaign issue, and therefore even as education. We'll continue along the West Coast, moving on now to Carol Lau at UBC. Carol, take it away.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Jerry. It's always lovely to hear from the expert and guru in anti-corruption education. And you know, the notion of anti-corruption education itself sounds new, but the principles that underlie anti-corruption are not. And I'm wearing two hats on this panel as a faculty member and director of the Center for Business Law at Allard Law, but also as an affiliated scholar at the Dillon Center for Business Ethics at the Sauder School of Business. And, you know, I think anti-corruption when taught in law schools versus business schools are both for obvious and not so obvious reasons quite different. And as a corporate lawyer by trade, I'm very happy to be situated in this order for this question, where I'm in between Jerry, you know, whose expertise is criminal law, public law, and David and Chris, who are in business and philosophy. You know, and given there is no universal definition of corruption, you know, which can vary depending on social, political, and the economic structure of each society, I think it's important for our educational institutions to create an atmosphere of learning where students can acquire skills to identify where there is an intentional abuse of an entrusted power for private gain, and how laws and norms help shape, interact, and regulate this behavior in a meaningful way. You know, so the notion of anti-corruption itself is embodied in many ways in our law schools, and I know a lot of folks listening here are from a variety of faculties. You know, so but to give some background, the Federation of Law Societies requires all Canadian law students to take courses in criminal law, administrative law, legal ethics. At UBC, our law school also requires first-year students to take transnational law, which provides a foundational base of understanding for courses on global corruption and really guarantees all our Allard students are exposed to anti-corruption education. There was also a short time where the Federation also required that all law students understand fiduciary duties in commercial relationships, a key feature, I would say, in upholding anti-corruption in governance and private law settings. However, that requirement was removed by the Federation last year, and a lot of law schools have reacted by also promptly removing that from our mandatory curriculum in favor of giving students more freedom to choose whatever they like in upper year. So courses like business organizations are optional in about half of Canadian law schools, I'd say. So the importance to me is in ensuring that the mandatory courses we do offer, there are basic understandings in anti-corruption that provide toeholds to the array of optional advanced courses for our students, such as the ones we offer on global anti-corruption, thanks to Professor Joe Weiler and Jerry, who co-teach it, white collar crime, law and development, the regulatory state, social justice and human rights. We have a great human rights clinic run by Nicole Barrett that in the past has been engaged in BC whistleblower protection laws, corporate liability and deterrence, mining and natural resource law, corporate social responsibility in the law, many courses that address disclosure and transparency, risk assessments. And so though in the mandatory courses, what we need are professors that can instill and inspire students in students the importance and interest in pursuing this area of education. You know, I need to give a special shout out to our anti-corruption law program, you know, which our Center for Business Law supports. There are just many students opportunities for students to get involved. And I think that the students, in my last one I'll say, are immensely grateful for these opportunities. A great deal of what we do in first year of law school, and frankly, what we should be doing in the business schools is detoxing our students from what they've learned from TV. We need to de-Americanize a lot of notions that have been sold to them on what the law is and does, and de-Hollywoodize a lot of concepts on what businesses are and are not required to do under the law. We need to have them understand how they're situated in the world, both individually and globally. And many are surprised to learn that Vancouver is the mining capital of the world. They think mining and natural resource law is a very narrow field of study, only to learn later that there are piles of mining companies on every street corner in downtown Vancouver, and much of our international trade is based on natural resources. They also think of Asian legal studies as a far off, discrete, irrelevant area of scholarship when they picture practicing downtown, only to learn that China is influencing international norms and business standards at a very uncomfortable speed for many of us, you know, with their Belt and Road Initiative and many Chinese state-owned enterprises exercising these soft powers across industries. So I think awakening students to these realities early on is important. And certainly there are always live examples going on corruption issues. Take SNC-Lavalin, Huawei as examples. And so connecting the theory and the law with the news, current news, growing trends, and practical realities on the ground for students is critical to fostering that interest and understanding its relevance. So I think that's it from me.
Great, thank you very much, Carol. We'll continue along, going west to east. We'll cross the Rocky Mountains, and we'll bring in David in Calgary.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for having me. It's great. Like Carol just said, I like my position because I'm sort of the transitional person between the legal faculty and other folks. So unlike Jerry and Carol, I take a pretty different approach because I live in a different place. I'm not in a law school. So I am basically, I live in 3 different places, and I'll take them sort of in order to tell you about the kind of anti-corruption education that we do. So I'm in a philosophy department, a business school, and then I also do a significant amount of work in the Calgary business community. And in all 3 of those places, we're doing ethics and anti-corruption education. So in the philosophy department in particular, what we are doing is not focusing on the details of particular laws. Instead, we're trying to teach foundations and principles which will get people to care about whatever the laws are when they get to the point in their careers when they will be obeying them and implementing them. And then some of these people will go on to write whatever the future laws are going to be. So what we try to do is give them a really strong foundation in moral theory and to think in sophisticated and reflective ways about ethics. So in the philosophy department, we have 3 undergraduate classes that are relevant to this. We have a straightforward business ethics class, which covers the basics of all sorts of business ethics issues. That class was very heavily enrolled by our computer science students, because computer science students at the U of C are required to take an ethics class. And so to respond to that, we actually created an information technology ethics class, sort of specifically aimed at computer science students to deal with the particular issues that come up in information technology. So both of those are sort of business ethics classes. And because so much corruption activity takes place with advanced information technologies, that's a really good class to have that there. The third class we have, which relates to this, is my own baby, which is the class I teach in the philosophy of money, which looks very generally at philosophical issues related to money, but issues of corruption come up there quite frequently, and that's a really good draw for lots of students from the business school and the econ department and things like that. Even at the graduate level, I offer seminars that are related to anti-corruption and ethics issues. Last year, maybe 2 years ago, who can tell what time is doing now? But in the past, I taught a class that I called Dirty Money, which was a graduate level seminar trying to investigate precisely what's wrong with not exactly corrupt activities, but what's wrong with taking money from an illicit source. Especially if you can do something good with that money, why not take it and go do that good thing? So that was a really fun class that we worked on. And then coming up in this winter, I've got a class on the ethics of currency, which is devoted to trying to engage the question of what form our money ought to take. So you might know there was a case in India last year, I think, in which there was an attempt to cancel all cash above a certain level of denomination, specifically as an anti-corruption method. And so what I want to look at are the sort of ethical issues around the form that our money takes at the graduate philosophical level. That's all pretty abstract, but it should be because it's in the philosophy department. So let me move to what we do in the business school. In Haskayne, I am a fellow in CCAL, which is the Canadian Centre for Advanced Leadership. CCAL was instrumental in helping to develop a class in ethical leadership, which is required of all BCom students at the business school. And also CCAL tries to offer lots of other sort of so that's one part of the curriculum, but CCAL also tries to offer lots of appealing and voluntary ethics education. So to that end, we have brought a bunch of different ethics speakers to town. This last year, we brought Ed Freeman, Joanne Shula, and Mary Gentili, who are all really big in the world of business ethics. They came out, gave public lectures. They had student-facing lectures where specific teachers brought them in to their classrooms to give guest lectures. And then we even brought them down for some sort of industry events as well. So CCAL is working on having both student and public engagement for business ethics issues. And I myself got to do a pretty cool capstone class for our new Masters of Management program, which is kind of like an MBA, but aimed at people who didn't do a business degree as an undergraduate. So instead, it is a program designed to give business skills in sort of 1 year to people without an undergraduate business degree. That program has a week-long capstone course that works with a specific industry partner. And so for a week at the beginning of this year, I was at the headquarters for WestJet, where in the morning, WestJet would teach about their operations, and I would talk about the ethics of it in the afternoon. So that's some of the stuff we're doing in Haskayne specifically to talk about ethics education. But again, we are trying to inculcate principles and sophistication. We are not sort of talking about the details of, say, the UK Bribery Act. Finally, just very briefly, James mentioned our work with the Integrity Network, and TI Canada is actually a partner with the Integrity Network. So I think a bunch of people from the Integrity Network are attending this webinar right now. But it is a group of business ethics professionals, ethics and compliance folks from mostly Calgary, but we do have folks from lots of other places in Canada as well. We meet about 4 times a year to talk about business ethics issues. And one of those meetings is offered in specific partnership with TI Canada, and that has an anti-corruption education angle to it as well. One nice thing we've been able to do in the last few years is actually involve students in the Integrity Network. So both undergraduates and graduate students come to our meetings, see what's going on sort of on the ground, and get an opportunity to meet the people actually doing this education and doing doing the training right now. So it's a really nice sort of less abstract and theoretical sort of thing. So that's what not the whole University of Calgary is doing, but that's what I'm doing in my two little worlds of the philosophy department of the business school, and I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you very much, David. Indeed, just quickly scanning down the attendees list. Hello to everybody from the Integrity Network in Calgary who is attending today. Thanks for joining us. Finally, we come over into Ontario. So we stop here in the east. We unfortunately aren't going any further east, but we hope to include more Quebec and the East Coast in future panels. But Chris, take it away from Ryerson.
Thanks very much. So in terms of what our school is doing, I mean, it's colored by the fact that we're a really big school. The Ted Rogers School of Management is the largest business school in English-speaking Canada. We've got about 11,000 undergrads in our Bachelor of Commerce program, a couple of hundred graduate students. And we've got a dozen different majors in our BCom program, ranging from law and business to marketing to accounting to hospitality and tourism. We have one of the biggest co-op programs in the country as well. Myself, I'm like David, I'm a philosopher, not a lawyer, but I'm firmly situated within the business school. I'm chair of something called the Department of Law and Business, along with a handful of other philosophers and a larger handful of business scholars. So for us, anti-corruption is really kind of a piece of a bigger puzzle in two different senses. First, anti-corruption is just one small piece of the kind of overall business ethics education scene. As parts of which we talk about everything from anti-corruption to issues in personal ethical decision-making to corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and structural and institutional and policy issues. Also, the fact that we're a big complex school means that actually, as it happens, out of 12 different departments, 12 different majors that are administered within the business school, 5 of them have their own ethics courses. Some of those for their own majors, as in the accounting department, and others open to everyone, as in the ethics course I teach through our department. So what goes on in terms of ethics and anti-corruption education? Well, it starts with, in first year, every undergraduate business major in our building, and that's 2,500 students a year, take a course, a mandatory course called Intro to Business Law, which includes a whole bunch of the standard stuff on that an introduction to business law course would have, and in addition to a module on ethical reasoning. Then there are the ethics courses in various departments. There's a course on ethics in commerce, ethics in finance, ethics in accounting, ethics in hospitality and tourism. Our Department of Global Management Studies has an ethics course. And then at the MBA level, there's a course that brings together ethics law and CSR, and that's a required course. In addition to that, there's a bunch of stuff as there kind of needs to be. It can't all be in the classroom. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes on at different centers and institutes across the business school. So just to give a couple of examples, the Ryerson CSR Institute, which is run by my colleague, Kernahan Webb, who's a legal scholar and kind of a significant name in the Canadian CSR scene, runs something called the Ryerson CSR Institute. And they do a range of workshops and seminars on CSR, most of them open to the public, with an emphasis to the public, but also attended by students, with an emphasis on mining and international business, in part reflecting the fact that while, as Carol says, Vancouver may be the capital for mining, Toronto is the capital for financing mining. So we're kind of the other capital. So there's a substantial interest in that topic here. And so anti-corruption issues come up pretty frequently when you've got a series of workshops on mining and international business. There's also the Ted Rogers Leadership Center, which I'm the director of. And we do a bunch of stuff. We have a business ethics speakers series, which is open to the public. By the way, open to the public has historically meant open to a kind of a small local audience, but hey, guess what's happening this fall? Like lots of other things, it's going to be online and perhaps open to attendance from across the country. Still sorting that out. so we talk about a range of issues in that speaker series. We also do a series of extracurricular workshops and seminars in-house strictly for our own undergrads and MBA students. And those are on everything from ethics in marketing to mentoring ethical leaders to anti-corruption. And so the lesson, I think, from my perspective, so, you know, why talk about what's going on just at my school? I think the lesson is that at a big business school, and likely at any business school, anti-corruption can and should be kind of woven through and should show up in a lot of places, just as an appreciation of anti-corruption is needed throughout any complex business organization. That's it for me. Thanks.
Yep, I was on mute. Okay. The first round of questions was to give everybody an introduction to what's going on at some of the schools across Canada. Of course, other schools have a number of other courses going on. There's a number of TI Canada members who teach individual courses. We have a number of members who also teach law at University of Toronto, who we've had good partnerships with in the past. I invite participants to ask any questions about program specifics, if you'd like. I saw one question from Denis about what is CSR, corporate social responsibility, for those who aren't engaged with it too often. But I'll kick off just a few questions for our panelists while we have this opportunity. Carol, I'll start with you. You named a number of the schools, but as well, you're also, correct me if I'm getting the position wrong, the chair of the Peter P. Dillon School for Business Ethics. Did I get that?
No, I am UBC Sauder Distinguished Scholar of the Dillon Center for Business Ethics. It's
Okay.
a long title, but I'm also the director for the Center for Business Law at Allard Law.
Okay, apologies for that.
No worries.
I'm wondering if you can, it's interesting for me seeing, I come from an international development background. I've seen international development programs in schools blossom in a number of universities. I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of a background as to why the Ethics Center, it's a fairly recent school, came up at UBC.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sauder School of Business has very wisely positioned itself as wanting to be a leader in ethics and sustainability, and I'm very proud of the school for doing so. It's frequently ranked as the top in Canada, for no offense to the others in business schools, but in that we have our the Dillon Center, you know, the benefactor is Peter Dillon. You know, it's really dedicated to running a lot of programs throughout the year, focused on business ethics, responsible business. And also at the Sauder School, we have our Center for Social Innovation and Impact Investing. We have our Ethics and Sustainability group, many courses as well, both mandatory and optional related to ethics and sustainability. Their MBA course program in particular, I've guest lectured quite a few times in there, where they require that students understand, you know, and these are executives, a lot of executives that come in too, about the need for these principles to be imbued in everything that they do. And that's why I actually love, I saw the question on the chat on what is CSR. Could I answer that? Because I feel like what's happening now is, you know, in the past, CSR, so corporate social responsibility, which I guess it's great to hear someone actually asking that question, because I forget. I feel like it's so imbued in the mainstream, but actually maybe too much we create our little bubbles where we think that. But you know, this notion of corporations ensuring that they are ethical and that they are trying to also do good for society and be stakeholder based is understanding the impacts that they have on anyone that can be affected by their actions, is something that I feel in the past has been seen as a very discretionary activity by corporations, right? And I feel like that is also, to me, again, some of the Americanization in terms of understanding what that concept is. But I feel like the trajectory now, given the laws, given how Canadian corporate laws always have been, it is not a discretionary activity. it is something that I think we need to communicate within the business schools as something that is a required action. You know, we have stakeholder remedies infused in our corporate laws. We have the oppression remedy. We also are far more regulation accepting type of country. And we have a lot of regulations that require companies to be good, including, you know, very recently our Impact Assessment Act that's come about. And so I think that, you know, the trajectory that I'm seeing that I think needs to be kind of hammered through in the business schools is communicating that it's not really an optional thing to be practicing or doing nowadays. It's not just donations, it's not just marketing, but something that, you know, like whether you like it or not, you can be the leader, you can be a laggard, but eventually you're going to get dragged in to have to do that. And so to be resilient as a company, you have to understand those risks and the compliance factors and being able to ensure that your actions, that you're responsible for your actions. So, you know.
Great. Thanks very much, Carol. Going to go to some of the questions from the audience. I'll note one question from Cheyenne. Cheyenne, great to see you on. She asked us earlier, but this is just a general to say that she asked if website and course resources could be repeated or circulated. And certainly I posted Jerry's law book up on the chat box. Any of our panelists feel free to post your school's websites in the chat box. But when this webinar is being recorded and we will circulate it. And when I do that, I'll add hyperlinks to some of the key resources that have been mentioned. We'll go to one of the questions here in the panel. Oh, we had another one, but I'll get to the first one. This is from Patricia Allen. How can companies be more involved in ensuring that ethics and compliance is more at the forefront of training programs such as business or law? And I'll toss this up to the whole panel. Remember, you're on mute. There we go.
Thank you very much. I'm on mute. I'm off. I'd start this by simply suggesting that what I've learned today is that there's a lot happening at some universities in different departments. And I don't know if it's the same at your university, but it would be useful if each university had, for example, UVic. I know of very little that's happening in our other related faculties. I know I've tried to interest the business school a couple of times in getting sort of a more regularized course on global corruption, which could fit for law and business, and didn't really find interest there. It's really a question of, is there a professor who sees that as a specialty, et cetera. So that's one observation. Some of us, even in the field for a while, don't know what others are doing outside of their department or their discipline. I was quite interested in computer science and other aspects. So for me, as we move forward, it seems to me there's a lack of information amongst Canadian universities and maybe within you know, the schools of business around the country as to what's already happening and what's out there. So that could be valuable if our notion is to promote more education. Finding out what others are doing, I think, is one very helpful way. If I can go back to law schools, every law school has been required by the Law Society, Federation of Law Societies, now to have one compulsory course, which is called ethics or professional responsibility. I've surveyed those who are teaching that in a couple of universities to see what portion of that could they say, are there a couple hours on sort of corruption and how corruption can raise, what the ethical issues are for lawyers who are doing international business transactions, where do those lines occur? By and large, and I can't speak for all of Canada because all Canadian law schools haven't done the full survey, but I was a little surprised, and at our faculty, I can tell you that we have two instructors who teach wonderful courses in that area, but they are not touching on corruption as a discrete topic. The word might come up a couple of times, but so it seems to me, again, as one example, corruption isn't in the forefront of all law professors. It is more so in a few courses, like if you have an international business transactions course, it's hard to think about that without running across the corruption aspects. But even in those courses, when I've checked with a few people, for example, at another university, they indicated, well, there's about 2 hours of corruption. Now, we didn't get into, what is that 2 hours devoted to, but that's a little slim, but at least it's an introduction. I just maybe I'll stop there, other than saying that there's kind of two ways of proceeding with and it's not one or the other, it should be both, with proceeding with education on corruption. And one is the intensive course, such as I might teach, or you could create it in business where it's really corruption is the focus, right? An intensive course, or there's the module approach within. And there's not a course that I'm aware of in university where you can't say corruption touches it in some fashion. And so the module approach, I think the challenge on modules is the teachers that are doing those other courses, often they have no interest, right? That's wrong. They have no background in corruption, and therefore they're not inclined to go off and teach a module where they really don't have the background to do so. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Just noting the time, and we do have a number of questions now coming in, which is fantastic. Thanks, everyone. We're going to try and get to as many of them as we can. And I'm also seeing some comments of educators at different institutions talking about their coursework, which is fantastic. I encourage everyone to look at the chat box and see what other schools are offering. We'll get to more Q&A. David, yeah, quickly.
I just wanted to add one thing in answer to Patricia's question very briefly.
Yeah.
First of all, I know Patricia, hi, and I would actually suggest her questions about how companies can be involved in ethics education and putting it at the forefront. And the best thing that companies can do is help provide us with resources. Right? Money is great and we can use it to fund things, but one of the best resources is the people at those companies themselves. If we could bring somebody into our classroom as a guest lecturer, if we could have someone to talk about with a research project, and a lot of the people in the Integrity Network provide this for me, so I would love to see more of this, but more partnerships and providing us with resources, both in terms of financial resources and just knowledge resources would be fantastic.
Great. Yeah, Carol?
I have to say, I really would encourage there to be some cross-faculty collaborations. Our Center for Business Law has also collaborated across faculties. We've created a cross-campus seminar series called Mining and Mineral Extraction in a New Global Landscape. This is with the Dillon Center, our Allard Law, the School for Public Policy and Global Affairs, Keeble Mining Institute, Zerdy and Brim, where we're now having people come in to give public lectures. And what's great is then you get a very interdisciplinary crowd coming in to listen in on these guest speakers. And then we pass off, we take turns doing the work for each of these seminars, but then they're able to come in. And I think it's just a really great way to have these cross discussions on this very important and big topic. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carol. And I guess, Chris, did you want to chime in on this question, just as everyone else has?
Yeah, just partly to echo David's comment, but to say, resources can mean a lot of things. It can also mean hosting a workshop at if you've got the space, at your business's premises, and invite students. The thing that motivates business students above all else, at least my students, is networking with industry professionals. So if you say, look, we're going to host either one of your professors or a panel, something like this, at our place, and invite a handful of students, that is getting into their mind space better than anything else you can do, probably.
Great, thanks. I noted a comment in the chat that people aren't seeing everyone's comments in the chat panel. I realized that there's a to option, and you'll see that check if it's preset to all panelists. You can move it to all panelists and attendees, or you can choose specific panelists or specific attendees if you want to just have private chats with people. So yeah, just if you want everyone to see it, go to the drop down and click it onto all panelists and attendees. We've got a number of questions, but I want to move on to the second round, and then hopefully we'll get to as many of the questions in order as they came to me during the Q&A. We talked about what each of the panelists is offering now. In the pre-conversation session, we had a great conversation on where anti-corruption education should be going, and each one of our panelists touched on this a little bit. Carol talked to us about detoxifying American myths to students. I remember when I was thinking about law school, some people saying, if you think it's like Law and Order, don't go to law school. So that's one of the detoxifying elements, but there's a number of other places that anti-corruption education should go. So we're going to change up the order on this one. And David, if you want to take it away with either what are challenges or where do you think anti-corruption education should go?
Sure. I'll say just a little bit about both of those things. So where I think anti-corruption and ethics education is going to go and should be going is toward more specialized ethics classes, kind of like the IT ethics class that we created at Calgary. I think what you are going to see with information and anti-corruption and lots of specific ethical areas is that they are going to take off and grow the way medical ethics did in the 1970s. I think because, as you can see, there are lots of intricacies to understand in anti-corruption education and in information. You need people who understand not just the ethical principles and who can think in a sophisticated way about that, but understand how the machinery works, right? Both the physical or literal, or the literal or figurative machinery of how the financial markets work, about how the government laws work, about how the various methods for getting around those laws work. I think the place we need to go, and I think the place we're going to go, is toward more specialized ethics education. I hope not to the detriment of general ethics education. I still want to see general business ethics classes and general anti-corruption education, but I think specialization is where it's going to go and where it has to, because if you don't know how the machines work and if you don't know what the tricks are, you won't understand what the ethical issues are. And right, as somebody who works on the philosophy of money, it is so very easy to misunderstand what's going on in cryptocurrency. But I happen to be acquainted with a couple of computer science professors who I say like, well, Bitcoin does this. And they go, no, it doesn't at all. And so it's really important to have a kind of specialized education where you understand the way the machinery actually works. What are the challenges for this? I mean, I think there are the standard challenges that everybody here today will understand with all kinds of ethics and anti-corruption education. That's limitations on resources, lack of an appetite for doing this, the general perception that what you're doing is sort of a frill or an add-on or not that important. I think that's a challenge that we all face. But more specifically, I think some of the challenges that are going to come up there is the silo effect that we've heard mentioned here before, but I think it's really important that we overcome those hurdles, because in the pre-screen, in an earlier discussion, we were talking about what sort of recruiters we're looking for. And actually, anecdotally, the people who come to me who talk about ethics and how to sort of show their ethical bona fides are not really students looking to prove to their employers that they have the proper ethics education or that they're genuinely committed. It's people at organizations who have a retention problem. So I have, at least anecdotally, had 5 conversations with people saying, David, how do we make our organization more reputable? Because we keep losing good people. And when we do an ethics interview, what they say is, I want to work for a company that has a better reputation. I want to be involved in more meaningful work. I want to be doing work that doesn't make me feel bad about myself at the end of the day. And so I think like we're trying to do work on our side to teach our students how to be ethical, but the appetite there seems to already be present, and it gets expressed in the workplace later on. And that was the final thing that I wanted to say, because this is not really true of any of the folks in my integrity network or any of the folks that really work with me, because they understand and they're committed to ethics and anti-corruption education. But I have encountered an attitude in the business world that ethics is something that colleges should teach, and then once we've taught it to them, it never needs to be mentioned again. right? Like we will give them the basics in algebra and ethics, and then why didn't you, right? If something goes wrong, that's the educator's fault that they didn't learn that in school. And I think the work that we're doing in universities to do ethics and anti-corruption education is really important, but we're also just planting the seeds. And if you arrive at your workplace and it's clear that nobody cares about the things that we taught you and that it will not advance your career at all, and in fact, it will be a hindrance for you to talk to, those plants will die. So whatever we do in educating our students, that message needs to be carried out. I mean, we know this from stuff about tone from the top, but the messages that we send need to be echoed by industry. So precisely what we've been talking about in an event like this, in which you have industry and academia coming together to sort of have a single conversation about this, is really, really important because no matter what I do in the classroom, if there is an organization that has enormous pressure against it, my educational abilities can only go so far. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you very much, David. A lot of interesting things there. I caught the point about add-ons of ethics, and we'll get back to it on if students see that are surprised by it. I know, compliance and anti-corruption, even as I said, coming from international development, it's often seen as this kind of siloed side thing, but let's do the actual work. And of course, adding on anecdotal evidence that you've received that employers are having turnover of students who just don't see the employer matching up with their ethics. Jerry, I see you kind of raising your pen. Do you have an add-on quickly for
No, I'll wait. Thank you, James.
Okay, sure. Let's move on then to Chris to follow up on comments.
Sure, thanks. I think there are, I'm going to focus on where I think anti-corruption education should go, or sort of some small trends or some things that I'd like to see be trends, and I'll focus on three things. The first is, I think there's room for better integration of the study of anti-corruption into the study of markets and vice versa. We too often still in business schools see this as kind of, people, or at least in the reputation is that we see it as a matter of ethics versus business rather than business through ethics. And I think once you really understand the issues, you see that understanding the corrosive power of corruption actually helps you understand better the true role of markets in society. And conversely, understanding the role of markets in society lets you understand better just why corruption is not just a moral problem, but an economic and justice problem too. Second, I'd like to see a bit more of a trend towards what we are now calling experiential learning, things like the use of simulations, the use of live actor simulations, those forms of training. And I'm actually involved in a project right now called InLab, which is kind of a research and development project I've got going on that involves developing interactive digital simulations, which are basically text-based kind of mini cases where individuals, whether it's corporate employees or students, are put in a situation, asked to choose, and then they see the consequences of their decisions and make further choices. And these are playable on any digital device. We've currently got a project funded by the federal government to work with BMO's ethics office in tailoring these to the needs of frontline workers. And I think this is a promising thing because all educators know that knowing is different from doing. We don't have corruption happening because people haven't figured out that bribery is naughty. Knowing is different from doing, and you'll learn to do by practicing. Now, traditionally, for things like ethics and corruption, it's hard to get practice because you can't plunk people into ethically fraught situations and just ask them to try harder next time. So I think this efforts to find better ways to kind of simulate in a meaningful way, in a safe but cognitively realistic way is useful, and I can post a link to that work later on. Third, I think we need to think, and this ties a little bit back to the issue I spoke at the TI Day of Dialogue that James mentioned earlier. I think we need to think more carefully about the boundary between post-secondary education and on one hand and corporate training on the other. And it's kind of remarkable the extent to which these are very separate worlds. Most people who know about corporate training don't know much about what goes on inside business classrooms. And most people who are teaching in business classrooms don't know much about what goes on in the world of corporate training. So they're typically carried out very separately. And it's related to this problem I've been fascinated in for a few years, which is that a lot of what we do in both of those contexts, or mostly in the business school context, is we focus on C-suite wrongdoing, right? We focus on the big stuff, the stuff that makes scandals, the stuff that makes the front page of the newspaper. But what we need more is a focus on the problems faced by our most junior employees, my students, who are going to be your employees next year, and who may already be your co-op students. The focus on C-suite wrongdoing is extremely remote for students. It's important to know, for students to know, why Enron fell and what happened at SNC, but that's not the problems they're going to face when they first graduate. They're going to face smaller frontline issues that in the aggregate have much bigger knock-on effects. So for example, think about the co-op student who learns as David says, unlearns everything we taught them, and learns in the first week on the job that bending the rules is okay. They may well be a future vice president or a senior sales executive who gets the company into serious trouble. So I'd like to see a lot more focus on the boundaries between ethics education on one hand and corporate ethics training on the other, and more attention to the role of junior people and the kind of problems they face. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. 3 very specific recommendations that are all great to work on. I hope some of our corporate attendees or other educators take note of these. In our second round, we said we'd go next to Carol. So Carol, take it away.
So I want to make 2 quick points on the future of anti-corruption education, one about diversity and another about private law and business schools. So to me, the future of anti-corruption education has to be diverse in terms of who's teaching it. Representation matters, and while I think gender diversity is very important, I confess the lack of racial diversity in academia has been occupying my mind of late, given all the news in the world. And although in truth, it's never been far from my mind since I joined the academy after my years in practice. I shared with in our prep call that I was recently at an event on money laundering, and one of the panelists to describe a money laundering scheme used a random Asian name as an example, which was fine. But it occurred to me then as I listened to it, to an all-white, almost all-male panel of police officers, that I was the only East Asian person in the room of about 80 people. And I think an intersectional understanding of power dynamics, particularly in the context of corruption, policing, history of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, must require more leaders in academia to contribute to this type of education. So simply, we need to hire more diverse faculty who, I assure you are out there, but are very difficult to hire them. It's very difficult to hire them when there are institutional and systemic unconscious biases at play. Industry as well, take mining, for example, in terms of its stats on gender diversity in boards is less than 7% women, which is half of the abysmal 15% for corporate boards in general. And that's even after Ontario and other provinces implemented a comply or explain regime for board diversity in 2015. So there are some problems there beyond simply a lack in the pipeline. Invisible minorities are 4%, Indigenous peoples are less than 1%. But in terms of industries where corruption is high, those numbers aren't even available. They're non-existent. So I think the future of this type of education, in order for it to thrive, necessitates a diverse faculty. And I think anti-corruption education must come with it anti-racist education. So we need to do better on that front. Last, about the business schools, we've heard a lot in the books, these books describing Harvard Business School as the root of all evil. And, I'm very proud to be affiliated with Csr, who, again, has worked very hard to create a very elite sustainability and ethics program. It's important, though, for Canadian business schools to teach norms that reflect the legal skeleton that exists in Canada. So these ideas of shareholder primacy, as you mentioned, James, early on, and maximizing profit above all else, I'm so bored of this conversation, right? Like, these are very American. Delaware corporate law messes and interpretations that have spread and often pervade director education, even though they're simply not the laws here in Canada. And with that mentioning of Larry Fink and the CEOs that signed the Business Roundtable declaring their stakeholder base and these private certifications cropping up all in the States, that's because CSR, again, is considered this explicit discretionary activity when it should be more implicit. And is so in Canada with our oppression remedy, good corporate citizenship as per our Supreme Court of Canada and regulations. So they shouldn't be getting a cookie for something that businesses should be required to do. And I think that that needs to sort of emanate when we're teaching business ethics and business to these sort of students coming in. So making the business case, but also the legal case and the ethical case, all three. It's a multifaceted, complex problem that requires in that addressing all those areas.
Great, thank you very much, Carol. A lot there on diversity, excellent point. And bringing it in, also, we, as Canadians, there's that idea that corruption doesn't happen here, it's overseas, and that's a whole other conversation we can get into. But if you're going to interact on international business, it's good to know what international perspectives or root causes of corruption are in other places. So that's where diversity also comes in, and understandings of what, somebody else was talking to me about a new syllabus they're starting up for their anti-corruption program. It focused very much on the law and technical. And I said, start it off with a bit of what is corruption? Because it's so, even as an anti-corruption practitioner, it's always good to self-reflect on that and look at other people's views. On gender, sexploitation definitely as a gendered issue in corruption that is coming to the forefront more and more. And I liked your point about, if we get away from the American, detoxifying from the American system, if you start off with a base of Canadian law, that also sets out Canadian values and changes the dynamic of anti-corruption and CSR and other things. So a lot to take there. And Jerry, if you want to end us off on where you think anti-corruption education is going.
Yeah, I really would want to suggest a couple of things. Number one, I think I agree with every comment by our panelists in terms of what would be helpful and where things are actually going. So that's number one. And I think my suggestions really build on or are the same as some of those. For me, I already mentioned once that I think at our university, the first thing we need is an audit of who's doing what on corruption. Secondly, we need a group of people who are interested who could sort of create a little university group which would share that information and encourage one another to see much more cross-disciplinary education, et cetera. I only use one other person from sociology in my program, yet I have guests from all sorts of other places, but from my university, it's just the one. That's partly my problem of not getting out there to find out well enough if others are doing it, but quite frankly, I have asked a bit and I haven't found too much. The second point, though, is an audit. The second is, come together as a coordinating group, educational group. And the third is clearly we need to encourage the introduction of corruption in a broad range of disciplines, and in law schools, a broad range of courses. You're not going to do it in everyone, but again, if you had a little group who was thinking about this, there are easily half a dozen or 10 courses at in our law faculty, which could have at least one class, that's an hour and a half, 2 hours, introducing them to corruption. If you're going to do that, you've got to convince the professors who are doing it that it's a worthwhile thing. And secondly, you either have to offer to lead that class or provide them with materials. And I call those modules. So modules on, the relevant aspects of corruption and human rights I mean, that's huge. Your human rights course, corruption is a violation of human rights. So human rights course could be built upon that. But I go through the curriculum, whether it's public law, private law, or other range of courses. So you need someone, you need collectively a group to build that. I'm just going to end with sort of a plug, and I'm sorry to do this, but in my book, there is 90 pages, and you wouldn't want all of it, but 90 pages, which is chapter 1, Introduction to Corruption. And it kind of takes you through what is corruption, what are the causes, what are the impacts, how do we measure it, where can we go from here? There's a little, and I don't like it much what I have in there, a little political view, a little economic view, etc. It seems to me that one of the problems when you're going to do a module is, where do you start in the module? Do you just walk in and start talking about the opportunity for corruption in working in computers, and it seems to me there has to be a base. So if you think about modules, it seems to me we need relevant materials. They can't be too long, they can't be overly disciplined, to introduce students to the topic. I've seen people, give them 10 readings, which all introduce interesting things, but the students can't read that much for one class. So we have to become more disciplined in what we offer to them. So I was going to stop there, but I did want to answer. I see Jennifer Quaid. Hello, Jennifer is on there, and she asked a question about, a lot of the corruption's happening in places where there's an active business school. So what do you do if that's not the, the center of your university? And I would just say to Jennifer that, again, referring to my book, at least 1/3 of it is on what I call promoting integrity in the public service sector. And so there's a chapter on conflict of interest in corruption, political lobbying and corruption, another chapter on public procurement and corruption, whistleblowing protection principally in the government context, and political financing and corruption. So I just wanted to, if you hadn't seen it, Jennifer, just wanted to refer you to, the last 5 chapters in the book. Do in fact take a look at, not at corruption from a business perspective, but from a public law government perspective. How should the government be behaving in order to try to regulate those particular matters? And I just would add, again, not having expertise in the operation of government, I bring in a guest in each of those classes who has some practical experience. And sometimes they lead the class, or sometimes they just provide, answer questions that students would have of a more practical nature. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Jerry. A call for action from Jerry. If only there was some kind of organization whose mandate it was to coordinate people on anti-corruption matters in this country, and one that had funding to do so. But this is definitely a network that we want to keep going, and we've definitely talked our work in British Columbia, connecting especially UBC, and Jerry, you've been involved with the anti-corruption law program out in BC as one of our success stories in local initiatives. And David, we've been happy to keep that going with you in Calgary, and we definitely want to have more of these networked events, especially with educators. There's so much area to go. And I think, as been pointed out, and I'd even see it in the comments, we're talking amongst law schools and business schools and philosophy. Thankfully, we do have some variance, but there's no, my background is political science courses. We don't have political science here, or maybe even engineering. David, you brought up computer science courses. And we have Heather McIntosh, one of our participants, who's flagged her courses teaching ethics and health at University of Calgary. So Heather, thank you for flagging that. So a lot of great things. We have a little bit of time. There's a lot of questions. Apologies to everyone if I can't get to your questions. I see you've all been chatting to each other back and forth, answering some of your questions. I'll get to one that came up in the Q&A that's interesting. And here it's saying, fighting corruption is often a practical matter of preventing, detecting, investigating, and remediating misconduct. How can practitioners work with academia to share experiences that can support a hands-on approach to teaching? Some of you, Chris, you've pointed out a little bit some of these examples. I'm wondering if anybody else wants to get to this hands-on versus theoretical, and plus what Jerry was pointing out, a little bit what David was pointing out, underlying philosophies. You know, how do you get that mental space ready for using the technical tools? Anybody can pipe in on this one if you want.
Well, I'll just brag that our law school has a mandatory experiential learning component to every law student leaving our program has had to engage in experiential learning. And we have many clinics that are engaged in anti-corruption type of education in some form or another, particularly with our International Justice and Human Rights Clinic that I mentioned earlier. I'll also say, if I can just jump a little bit back to the balance in the public law and private law, which is an ongoing discussion in law schools in Canada that, you know, Chris and David, you luckily don't ever have to address really, but because it's all, you know, private sector. But well, the one thing I convey to my colleagues, because this was an active discussion that we had when we were talking about making business organizations either a mandatory or optional course, given what the Federation of Law Societies chose to do by removing that fiduciary duty requirement, is to point out how corporations are rivaling the state in institutional power and influence. And are we comfortable having our students leave without an understanding of this very influential organizational structure? And I find it kind of distressing how we sort of too much bifurcate the public versus the private and prioritize in certain ways. And it's obviously a balance in a legal program, right? Like you have a lot of different, everybody thinks what they teach is the most important thing, right? But I think that we are now in an era and age where to ignore that the corporate influence is a little bit troubling, and that we have to make sure to remember that. Sorry, so I got a little bit sidetracked there, but yeah.
Anybody else want to jump on that point of balancing hands-on technicalities with academia?
So I could add just, I mean, this is really,
sure.
Echo what I've said before. This is a beautiful place for a partnership between industry and academia. Because this is a great benefit for me personally in the Integrity Network, because I get to find out what's going on in the business world about 2 years earlier than I would if I just relied on it coming to me through academic journals. So particularly with anti-corruption, if you are thinking about preventing and detecting, the techniques that I can read about in an academic journal are pretty much dead because they've already been caught and dissected and nobody's really doing them anymore. If you are looking to discover what the techniques are, I need to know from the practitioners. So if you come and give a guest lecture in my class to talk about what kind of prevention and detection methods you are using, that can spawn a really great discussion, and that can put us that much further ahead. And in the process of doing that, there might be academic research that I could turn you on to that would be relevant or give you a different way to think about this. But this is really a place where you need the theoretical folks and the practitioners to come together and have a conversation because they're methodologically different, they're working on different time scales, and this is a place where I think partnerships are really important.
Great. Oh, Carol, go ahead.
You know, I forgot, I should plug actually one of the programs that I oversee that is quite amazing, which is our Corporate Counsel Externship. And we allow students to go spend a term shadowing corporate counsel in organizations. And this is, you know, the only one in Canada really that does, we're the only law school that does this in Canada. And it's one of our most popular programs. We get over 10 times as many applicants as there are spots, where we, and then the students get to see live what's going on inside an organization where obviously compliance, risk, you're the jack of all trades when you're in-house counsel. But, compliance and corruption issues are always sort of live tasks there. And so that's one absolutely great way for students to be able to learn on the ground these issues as they come, right?
Great. One question that we got, Chris, you mentioned that what happened in SNC-Lavalin and things in the C-suite are maybe distant from students, but still it comes to them in a lot of case studies. So we had one question there, and I'll put this one first to Chris and David, as you straddle, both of you straddle business students and philosophy students. So you can take this from an interdisciplinary approach. What was the reaction to your students with the outcome of the, well, throughout the SNC-Lavalin case, or the outcome of the SNC-Lavalin case?
You mean the most recent iteration of it? I mean,
yes, the most recent iteration.
Yeah, the part that actually didn't involve SNC-Lavalin, except very tangentially. Yeah, no, I think, I mean, this is an example of one of those stories. I mean, most of the things that, most of the interesting stuff that happened at SNC happened like 10 years ago. And so I use this as an example for my students that, you know, here, talk about reputation effect. You can have something labeled the SNC scandal, right? 10 years after any actual, you know, verified wrongdoing by SNC. So, you know, I don't recall any particular reaction to it by my students, because the actual, you know, when they're, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, students these days, believe it or not, it's horrifying, but they don't pay as much attention to the news of the day as they should. But I think it's it really is a matter of, you know, helping them see both that there are public consequences, right? That this is, you know, giant reputation impact, giant impact on particularly on the economies and the political systems of foreign nations. And I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I think part of what we need to do is use cases like that to help them see the consequences, to help them have reactions where they may not necessarily come into the classroom with the tools to have any reaction other than, wow, it's another sort of company in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. David?
So it's really interesting, the reaction. So Chris's point that this is a reputational effect 10 years after the fact is a really good one, especially because, so one of our commentators in the chat is with SNC-Lavalin now. They have a really robust ethics and compliance program, and some of them worked with me in the Calgary Integrity Network, and they've been working on putting together and have founded a Montreal Integrity Network as well. So what they're doing right now is very different from what they were doing 10 years ago, but that's of course not the public reputation. So the reputational risk is huge, and that's a great lesson. This is of course anecdotal. The reaction I had from my students with this when it was in the news was a combination of sort of excitement about salacious and interesting details, followed by complete cynicism that despite the reputational effects, most of the students were like, oh, you can, like, something that big can happen, and that's the official punishment that happens as a result of that. Oh, I'm going to go embezzle a bunch of money then, because that just shows that all of this is just toothless, right? So even though there is this really profound reputational effect, many of my students looked at that case and went like, it was really hard for me to make headway with them afterward, because I was like, no, you got to look out and don't do this or bad stuff's going to happen. They're like, really? I don't know about that. So I think that was, this is of course just anecdotal, but I think it was damaging because it resulted in a lot of cynicism from my students when it was in the news.
And that's an interesting point there. I mean, we can of course get deep into the discussion about the ruling in a whole other webinar. But this idea of, you know, remediation agreements setting an example, and we often talk about, does it set an example for corporate Canada about how to behave? But again, when we talk about education for the students and going into the workplace, it's not just about current businesses, it's about students as well seeing this and thinking, that's how the real world works? Okay. There are those who might argue that there was still large punishment. Again, we won't get into that conversation here. I just want to again follow up. Oh, Jerry, did you have a point on this?
Well, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the SNC comments. I definitely
without getting deep into the SNC-Lavalin case itself.
No, it's a general point.
Yeah.
And there was both cynicism from the results in terms of SNC Laval and from a whole range of things that happened throughout the case. And, oh yeah, there it goes again. And, you know, too big to prosecute and all that stuff. But it also, and of course, I also use it for the reputational damage point, which is itself quite significant. But I have a colleague who teaches at another university, and he teaches an online course, and it's to business students, but the program is for those who've been out in the business world. They're mid-career people who are coming back. I don't know the exact name of the course, and I don't know if it's a one-year certificate or whatever. But he's told me and he's taught it for 4 or 5 years at least, if not longer. And he's told me he's getting the people that are in the course are managers of largely small to medium-sized law firms. And the one thing that is consistent with them is they find it hard to believe that that the chance of getting caught is anything large enough that you should worry about if you did a risk assessment. And secondly, if it does happen, you know, the penalty or whatever is going to happen is not going to be big. And yes, Coca-Cola and SNC may have a public reputation, but you know, if I'm company ABC producing widgets, it doesn't matter if, you know, that there won't be the impact, I guess is what I'm saying. So my generalized point here is that enforcement is something we haven't mentioned here. I deal with it a lot in my course because it's a law course. And, you know, a lot of all this stuff that we're teaching depends upon enforcement. And I think many of you know that there is virtually no enforcement in Canada, whether it's from money laundering or any other aspect. 4 big foreign official corruption cases in Canada, maybe 5 after 20 years. It's really, I think it's disgusting and despicable, but at a minimum, whatever it is, it's sure small. And so that's impacting those folks out there who aren't working for SNC Laval and now with its big office and all the bells and whistles for its compliance program. They don't have a compliance program, period. And they're hard pressed to think it's important enough to do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a whole other topic we can get deep into. And of course, it's one that TI Canada works on, is increasing enforcement in Canada. A quick plug that if you want to help us continue on that mission, you can always make a donation to TI Canada or talk to us about becoming a supporter. Carol, I'll give you the last comment on the floor. We're coming up to the hour and a half.
Oh, okay. I saw Jennifer Quaid's comment that we need to have a separate panel on SNC Laval, and so I think you should host that, James, and I'm happy to co-host with you at the Center for Business Law. And we'll have Jennifer sitting on that panel because she's certainly an expert on SNC. You know, and just thinking about that too, how we need to incorporate in our teachings notions on regulatory capture as well. But the one thing that just really made me, it reminded me that we also need to, with these ideas of CSR, we need to rephrase them as notions of risk. And so even with the SNC saga and how it ended up, you know, we can remind our students about all the reputational and the cost risks and the costs that went throughout that, and be also able to phrase it in that way. So again, the business, legal, and the ethical case for all those sort of elements to make them understand why it's still not worth it to do it. And yeah, so that's it. So
great. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Carol. And I'd just like to thank all of our panel. This has been an absolutely excellent webinar. I always like webinars that go into practical ideas, and I love that we got that into the end. Maybe even a few to-dos for a handful of us about coordinating, about next webinars. Anyone in the panel who wants to take on the challenges that a couple of our panelists talked about inviting some of their students to your organization to learn hands-on, or if you'd like to lecture or give a guest presentation at any of their courses, to reach out. We'll be circulating the information once again through this. And I think it's just it's an area that we definitely have to look further. I'll just quickly give anecdotally from a totally different perspective, a totally different area. When I was living in the UK, I was invited and working at TI's office there I was invited to give a guest lecture at Oxford University on their International Development Day. And I talked about anti-corruption and global security because I worked for TI's defense program. And I talked about all the corruption risks in UN peacekeeping operations, going from sexploitation to soldiers running their own mining rackets to corruption of some countries skimming off the tops to meet UN equipment compliance and writing up ghost soldiers. And a lot of these students at Oxford prided themselves, were very visionary about what they were going to do in the world, hadn't really talked about the corruption components of international development, and hadn't thought that they, the do-gooders, might actually have a negative impact with their work. No, that's businesses and other people. And so it's been a consistent conversation that it's got to be, this anti-corruption education has to be cross-cutting through a whole number of fields. And again, Heather McIntosh, thank you for plugging School of Medicine at UCalgary Calgary to show that you're talking about it there. It's got to be in poli-sci courses, in engineering courses, David, in computer science courses, and definitely in a lot of these international development courses that are popping up. So that's my 2 cents. Again, thank you to Jerry Ferguson, Carol Lau, Chris Mcdonald, and David Dick for providing your time and excellent insights. Thank you to our corporate supporters once again: Export Development Canada, BLG, Deloitte, Denton, Sky Power, Global, Blake, Siemens, TD, Bank National, ACFO, Alicia, Caseware, Kinross, KPMG, Mintz Group, Tails, and Vidoc Group. If you would like to become a supporter of TI Canada, here's the link right here for everyone. And again, we do need funds to keep us going. I'm being absolutely shameless at this point. If you'd like to give a donation to TI Canada, you can do so in the link I just provided there. We are hoping to do a few more webinars in the summer. We'll see where things go as we're all locked in, where we'll be in the fall, but we hope to make this a regular practice and have more participation from across the country and around the world. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Wash your hands and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.